Our little space sci-fi series continues, and today we're talking about the 1980s. I picked only 10 films for this one, and with a decade this packed, that was not easy, so let's keep the list going in the comments. 2010 often gets dragged into conversations about unnecessary sequels, which automatically makes it sound like something unworthy of your time. And that is where I have to disagree. The story follows Dr. Heywood Floyd, played by Roy Scheider, as he joins a Soviet-American mission to Jupiter. The goal is to find out what happened to the Discovery, what went wrong with Hal, and why David Bowman disappeared. Helen Mirren plays the Soviet captain, and John Lithgow plays Walter Curnow, one of the Americans sent to investigate the dead ship. Of course, following 2001: A Space Odyssey was basically a suicide mission, but Peter Hyams was a huge Kubrick admirer, and before making the film, he asked Kubrick for his blessing. Kubrick's advice was simple: make sure you make your own movie. And Hyams did. 2010 does not try to recreate Kubrick, because that would have been impossible. Instead, it continues the story of the first film without ruining it, and answers some of the questions the original left behind. That may be exactly why some purists never gave it a fair chance. But if you have never heard of 2010, or if you avoided it because it sounded like a pointless sequel to a sacred classic, I think it is worth giving this one a shot. And Enemy Mine is another one that could use a little more attention. It has a strong story, excellent alien makeup, and the best thing in it is still the chemistry between the two leads. The film takes place during an interstellar war between humans and an alien race. Dennis Quaid plays Willis Davidge, a human fighter pilot who crash lands on an uncharted planet and finds out that one of the enemy pilots, played by Louis Gossett Jr., is stranded there too. At first, they keep trying to kill each other, because of course they do. But the planet is too harsh for that kind of luxury, so hostility slowly turns into a shaky truce. It is not a perfect film, and yes, it could sound painfully sentimental. But Enemy Mine works, and the message has not really lost its relevance. The Last Starfighter begins with Alex, a trailer park teenager who spends his free time playing a Starfighter arcade game. When he finally beats it, he finds out the game was actually a recruiting tool for an alien civilization looking for pilots. Soon, Alex is taken across the galaxy by Centauri, played by Robert Preston, and thrown into an interstellar war he barely understands. Back on Earth, an android copy is left in his place, trying to pass as Alex, deal with his girlfriend Maggie, and survive long enough while the enemy starts hunting him. The story is predictable, but that is also part of the appeal. It is the ultimate gamer fantasy. The kid who thinks he is going nowhere turns out to be exactly the person the galaxy needs. Director Nick Castle keeps the film mostly family-friendly, but not completely toothless. Robert Preston gives Centauri the right kind of showman energy, and Dan O'Herlihy has fun as Grigg under the alien makeup. The film also has an important place in effects history as one of the early features to make serious use of computer-generated imagery for its space battles. And speaking of technology, Starchaser: The Legend of Orin was one of the first full-length animated features made for theatrical 3D. The story follows Orin, a human slave living in a subterranean mine world. After discovering a sword that may be the key to defeating his captors, he escapes to the surface and gets pulled into a full space adventure with smugglers, robots, a princess, and a ship called Starchaser. And yes, the Star Wars parallels are not exactly hidden. But if you take them as homage rather than theft, the film becomes much easier to enjoy. It is still big and very committed to its own pulp adventure energy. Flash Gordon is one of those films they simply do not make anymore. And to be fair, I am not sure anyone could make this one on purpose. Football player Flash Gordon ends up traveling to the planet Mongo with Dale Arden and Dr. Zarkov, where they find Earth under attack by Emperor Ming the Merciless. So Flash, who was not exactly planning to become a space hero that day, has to fight Ming's tyranny and help save Earth from destruction. And then there is the film's secret weapon, Queen. The music makes the whole thing much harder to dismiss, even when the movie is being completely absurd. Flash Gordon is camp, no question. Some of it has aged strangely, and some of it was strange even in 1980. But it has real visual imagination and a kind of fearless silliness that big studio movies simply do not allow themselves anymore. Spacehunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, will remind you of Mad Max, whether you want it to or not. Peter Strauss plays Wolf, a space adventurer who takes a job rescuing 3 women stranded on a dangerous planet. That is more or less the story, and it does not need much more. Another highlight of the movie is the awesomeness of some of the vehicles, particularly the Scrambler, Wolf's all-terrain car tank that now brings to mind the Tumbler from the Dark Knight trilogy. Remember, there is no CGI here. These are all practical effects. Of course, this is a B-movie, and a shorter runtime probably would have helped it, but it is quirky and brisk enough to entertain. I could not leave Outland off this list. And by the way, this is Peter Hyams again, the same director who made 2010. It came out after Star Wars, clearly lives in the post-alien industrial sci-fi world, and it is basically high noon in space. All of that works. Sean Connery plays O'Neill, a federal marshal stationed at a mining colony on Io, one of Jupiter's moons. He uncovers a drug smuggling conspiracy tied to the colony's workers, and once he refuses to look the other way, he is marked for murder. That leaves him with a very familiar Western problem. He has to face it mostly on his own. It is solid fun, even if some parts ask you not to think too hard. But when a film has this kind of style and atmosphere, you probably will not mind. Nightflyers is a genuinely forgotten one. I only watched it myself recently. The film is based on a novella by George R.R. Martin and was a box office failure, grossing a little over $1 million on a budget of around $3 million. It follows a research team traveling on the starship Nightflyer. They are searching for signals that may belong to a mysterious race said to move through the galaxy, creating stars in their wake. It is another late 80s sci-fi film about people trapped on a dangerous spaceship. But Nightflyers is not just doing the usual monster in the corridors routine. It is closer to a science fiction ghost story. The captain, Royd Eris, only appears to the crew as a hologram. He cannot meet them in person because he was born in the antiseptic environment of space, and normal gravity and human germs could kill him. That is already strange enough. Then the ship is taken over by Adara, his dead mother, whose personality has been transferred into the computer. Jealous and possessive, she starts using the ship itself against the crew. It is not always smooth, and some of it looks very 1987, but the concept is strong enough to make Nightflyers worth digging up. The whole film is on YouTube, so I've left a link in the description. Of course, this spot could have gone to Star Wars, but everyone remembers The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi without my help, so allow me to go with The Ice Pirates instead. It is not exactly trying to be elegant. It has a much lower budget and a lot more comedy. The story takes place in a future where water has become the most valuable thing in the universe. Robert Urich plays Jason, the leader of a band of space pirates who steal ice from passing ships. After one raid goes wrong, he and his crew are captured by a princess who needs their help finding her missing father, and possibly a legendary planet full of water. Audiences did not exactly warm to it at the time, but it is still light and fun. And if you want more of this side of the decade, I recently made a whole video on 80s sci-fi comedies. You can find that in the description too. And if we're talking obvious choices, I had to land on Aliens. Not just because it belongs on any 80s list, but because it might be the best sequel ever made. I do not think we need to spend much time on the plot. Everyone knows the basics. The real question is how you even make a sequel to Alien. Ridley Scott had already made one of the most intense sci-fi films of all time. So Cameron did the only thing Cameron could do. He added an S to the title and turned it into a war movie in space. Sigourney Weaver was not exactly eager to return at first, but she ended up earning an Oscar nomination for the role, which is still insane for a sci-fi movie. The attention to detail is still astounding, the cast is brilliant, and as sequels go, you really could not have asked for a better one. Cameron has directed some great films over the years, but for me, Aliens is still his masterpiece.